Thank you all. Thank you all for coming out. It's a good-looking group, I must say. This is our second reading of the year, and we'll have one in about 3 weeks. Maureen McLean will be coming, so if you get a chance, come back for that. I'm Stephen Yenser, Professor Emeritus of the English Department at UCLA, which has been one of our sponsors from the very beginning of the series, which is about 50 years ago. And another longtime sponsor is UCLA Recreation. The series used to be done up at the Recreation Center, and there was that swimming pool for afterwards. But that was a long time ago, and my knee was in better shape. Another, of course, our main sponsor here is the Hammer Museum, the public programs, under the superb direction of Claudia Bester, who somehow puts everything together that happens in this museum. Boris Dralyuk took his PhD from UCLA, and until recently, he was the chief editor of the Los Angeles Review of Books. I guess the executive editor is the editor-in-chief. There you go. And he is now a presidential professor at the University of Tulsa, where he teaches English literature and creative writing, poems, translation. Boris was born in Odessa in Ukraine, and he's a preeminent translator of Slavic literature. He's a recipient also of the National Book Critics Circle's Greg Barrios Prize, the Kukula Award in nonfiction book reviewing, and he has a Tulsa Artists Fellowship, I think, for this next year, among other awards. They just keep coming. The poems and translations in his new volume, My Hollywood, focus on historic Hollywood, especially the Hollywood of the 1930s and 40s, sometimes as shaped by and recalled in terms of Russian émigrés who came to the City of Angels in those days. Because of his intimate involvement with Russian literature, I, a few days ago, was pondering the relationship the resemblance, I guess, of his poems and translations to the art of the Palak box. Some of you will know something about the Palak box, I hope. Palak is a town in Russia, not all that far from Odessa, recognized chiefly for its production of paintings descended from traditional icons. These are scrupulously crafted paintings that usually picture fairy tales and other stock subjects, pastorals and so on, a few genre scenes. And they're executed under heavy magnification, often, in tempera, with touches of gold dust against layered black lacquer on small paper mache boxes, which are which are themselves the product of painstaking, time-consuming processes. And they feature exquisite detail. And it's that detail in the context of tradition that recalls to me Boris's verse, which testifies to his demanding, venerable, prosodic forms, the couplet and the sestina, the villanelle and the pantoum, the onegan stanza and the ballad, and several that I've left out. And within these forms, what's extraordinary is his attention to le mot juste, the right word, always. We get a hint of this desideratum from his openings. He begins a poem about Sarah Bernhardt this way. Fatigued, divine, she steps out on the boards of Kinney Pier. Kinney Pier was a predecessor of the Santa Monica Pier, the Venice Pier. Fatigued, divine, she steps out onto the boards. I don't know what I like more, that oxymoron at the beginning, fatigued, divine, or the pun on boards at the end of the line, and that's just one line, of course. Here are a couple of other characteristic gambits. Today, and this one is pertinent, today I cast my absentee ballet. That's a good way to begin a poem, huh? But what are you going to do next? Here's another one. For ages, I've awaited my late style. And he ends poems with equal panache. One that is semi-nostalgic about vintage Hollywood concludes on a park bench near a statue of Rudolph Valentino with this nifty pair of lines. A crow clacks in the branches overhead, like a projector slowly going dead. Well, you've all heard crows clack out here and projectors going dead, and it's a perfect match. Yeats, W.B. Yeats, once opined that the correction of prose, because it has no fixed laws, is endless. But a poem comes right with a click like a closing box. A Palak box he no doubt had in mind. He didn't. Not all writers of either genre, prose or poetry, agree with Yeats about that, but reading or hearing Boris, one will find much evidence in Yeats's favor. Boris Dralyuk.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for coming here, and thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Shannon, and everyone involved in making this happen. I have a history with this place. Well, you know that. Most of you know me. It's a long history. As an undergrad at UCLA, between 2000 and 2004, I don't think there was a single reading in this series that I missed. Really. And I learned something from each of the poets on this stage, but not nearly as much as I learned from the man introducing them, who was my first and remains my most serious teacher in the art, the master box maker, Stephen. My only complaint with him tonight is that he stole all of my best clicks. Now all my punches have landed, so you'll hear them again, and they will have no effect on you. But pretend that they do. Pretend that you're hearing everything for the first time. I'll read that trio of poems that gave the book its title, My Hollywood, and the first one does indeed take place in the little pocket park some of you may know on Cherokee, in Hollywood, in the heart of Hollywood, Cherokee and Las Palmas. It's a pocket park. It's half a city block. And there's not one, there are two statues to Valentino in this park. One, rather abstract, that did not satisfy Valentino's greatest admirers. So they demanded that a more representative statue be put up of just his face. So you can take your pick. You can take the abstract Valentino or the real Valentino. I visited that park, I don't know, I can't count the times that I've sat on that bench. And then one day, I was reading a little crime novel by Horace McCoy, author of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And found his protagonist sitting on that same bench. And this is where the sequence departs. So the poem is called Aspiration, and it comes, like many of the poems in the book, with a little epigraph, sometimes not so little. I'll read the epigraph first. That night I discovered the park at DeLongpre in Cherokee, looking at all the small houses, telling myself that these were where Swanson and Pickford and Chaplin and Arbuckle and the others used to live in the good old days. Horace McCoy, 1938. This much is clear, the good old days have passed. Some giant fig trees, a few pygmy palms drop broken shade on disenfranchised grass. Dogs loping, limping, vagrants begging alms, and in the center, ludicrously named Aspiration, face uplifted, framed by dusty fronds, he stands on tippy-toe, abstract Adonis, bronze Lothario. Sit here all night if you can bear the grime, watch people come and go, but you will see no women in black shed tears for Valentino. The chic sinks deep into the dunes of time. A crow clacks in the branches overhead, like a projector slowly going dead. See, I told you, it just doesn't land right after you've heard it. The second poem in the series departs from one of the names mentioned there, which is DeLongpre, the name of the street. Now, DeLongpre, how many of you know who DeLongpre was? No one, right? Not a single person. How many of you drive down DeLongpre every day? Yeah, exactly. So I have to look it up for you, come on. So DeLongpre was one of the first celebrities in Hollywood, but he had nothing to do with the film industry. He was a French flower painter when flower painting was all the rage. He painted flowers of every kind, usually on commission, but he became so fabulously wealthy that he was able to plant a gigantic garden in Hollywood, which was then hardly populated, and the garden became a tourist attraction. So people would come out to Hollywood and Vine, before there was a Hollywood and Vine, to visit Paul DeLongpre's garden. And for all his trouble, he got a street named after him. Everything else is gone. So this is actually a little epigraph by Sandra, who was a poet you don't associate with Hollywood, but he took a big tour of Hollywood in 1936 and wrote it up. The poem's called The Flower Painter. Here's the epigraph. The chateau was also demolished, but don't go thinking this was an imaginary chateau. Inquiries made, it was the residence of Monsieur Paul Delongpre, a French painter who had lived here since the beginning of Hollywood. 1936. A scruffy rose bush puts on airs out front a big beige box, 2 stories caked in stucco, that bears the name in flaking cursive font of Paul Delongpre. Fainter than an echo, the long-departed flower painter's ghost patrols the grounds, where he for years played host to pleasure seekers in his man-made Eden. Decades ago, that Eden went to seed, and it pains me to recall what is no more. My Hollywood, mon vieux, is not ideal. A grand old dame reduced to dishabille, her glory far too faded to restore. But ruin was inscribed in what he built. His precious blossoms, they were sure to wilt. And the last poem brings the story a little bit closer to my background. It ends with it's set on a stretch of Santa Monica and Sunset that leads up to what used to be the Garden of Allah Hotel, which was at one point a private residence of a film star, who was also a star of the stage, named Alla Nazimova. And she fell on rather hard times toward the end of her life, had to sell her private estate. It became a hotel, and then she took up residence in the hotel. So the epigraph is from the Los Angeles Mirror News. The Garden of Allah Hotel, playground of the movie stars during the 20s and 30s, will be torn down to make way for a new commercial and business center. The hotel originally was the home of Alla Nazimova, late stage and screen star. And now I watch another era fade. Cyrillic letters scraped from shuttered storefronts, tar-crusted bread, stale fish, stiff marmalade sits sulking on the shelves, unchosen orphans in what were once the bustling little shops of Russian Hollywood. Hardly a soul now stops to thumb the plums, frown at the penciled prices. The neighborhood is lurching towards crisis, all in slow motion. Rents climb out of reach for émigrés. There's nothing new in this. Think of Nazimova and of her short-lived bliss beside her pool, her private Black Sea beach. She died a tenant in a bungalow of a hotel raised 60 years ago. These are very cheerful poems about Hollywood. Razzle-dazzle, give them the old razzmatazz. So this is bungalows. The mention of bungalows brings to mind my favorite architectural style of Hollywood, which is the bungalow. And even today, returning to the city after a very brief absence, I noticed yet more bungalows are gone in my neighborhood. This all began long ago, the destruction of these beautiful courts, but it really sped up during the pandemic. Under cover of COVID, developers began to knock these things down with little opposition, and the neighborhood that I loved, had such charm, West Hollywood, began to transform much more quickly. There's a great book about the bungalow by Robert Winter, who's the great defender of the bungalows. It's called The California Bungalow from 1980, and the poem is called The Passing of the Bungalows. This is the epigraph. The bungalow courts extended at least a touch of casual California living, even to the poor. They held their courts from here to Pasadena, not in regalia, but in plainer clothes, withholding judgment on our misdemeanors, warm, down to earth, arrayed in close-knit rows. No hint of hauteur to these Swiss chalets, these beaming Tudors, Spanish hideaways that dignified us with lagniappes of style, crown molding, copper awning, clinker tile. Fair bungalows, now your dominion comes to closure. I watch swaths of you demolished in favor of the featureless and polished plutocracy of condominiums. Your bold agaves, fierce protective aloes laid down their spears beside the realtor's gallows. See, that one's new to you, so it has more of an effect. This poem is being read by request. Shannon requested it. I've never had a poem requested before. I'm a star. Ding bats, ding bats. Let's hear you all. Ding bats. Okay, very good. So this is a poem about another architectural style that is close to my heart, but one much less well regarded than the bungalow, which is the dingbat apartment building. Yeah, you all nodding. Well, I grew up in the dingbats. I didn't grow up in bungalows. I've lived in bungalows, but those were lucky few years. The dingbat is what I know inside and out. And it's much maligned. The poem is called Close to Home, and the epigraph is from Los Angeles A to Z, a book by the couple Leonard and Dale Pitt. Epigraph. The dingbat typifies Los Angeles apartment building architecture at its worst. Some years ago, I learned they call them dingbats. These proud but shambly veterans at rest who lean on carport columns as on muskets, one tarnished decoration on each chest, a rust-red star or an abraded crest. An ugly name. It makes me feel indignant on their behalf. Haven't they done their best to serve with honor? Can they not be trusted to guard the tempest-tossed, the dispossessed, the migratory species of the West? Their rooms, unfurnished, furnished everything that we birds of paradise require for a nest. So what if half the cabinets are busted, the front door warped, the carpeting distressed? Fly free, they will not hold you, you're their guest. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, a few laughs, good. So the next poem is also close to home. This is an homage, a little portrait of the life that I remember best, the happiest days of my early immigration, which were spent at a bargain shop called Bargain Circus on La Brea. Do any of you remember this crazy place? Okay, yes. It was a nutty place. Really strange assortment of things on sale. There was a clown in front of it. Made my childhood complete. It really did. And it closed down, unfortunately. Now it's a 99-cent store, which has all the flair of a dead rat. So Bargain Circus, epigraph from the Los Angeles Times. So it goes at Bargain Circus, perhaps LA's most whimsical discount store. The eclectic selection of goods and guilt-inducing low prices draw a melange of Orthodox Jews, Russians, Armenians, and West Side connoisseurs. That's you folks. Los Angeles Times, 1997. Clown prince of bargain shops. Those penny Annie Xanadu's that take up half a block was the La Brea Circus. Huge barn chock full of overstock, a poor man's horn of plenty. Where we, though broke as sparrows, like canaries, flitted about, whistled with disbelief at deals, no steals, that would abash a thief. Big pens for pennies, big pens for nickels, inflation. Dollar dictionaries. I wore my Webster's out, clumsily wooing the tongue in which I sing this dime store's praise. But they're worn too, my memories of those days, like VHS tapes, after years of viewing and spooling backwards to the sweetest spot. Oh yes, that was another thing we bought, a plastic sports car VHS rewinder. So obsolete, so perfectly designed for its vanished purpose, like a streamlined hearse, inexorably heading in reverse. Yeah, that's what I like to hear. That's the kind of reaction I like. Okay, well, I'll read now a couple poems not by myself to give you a break. These are poems translated from Russian-speaking émigrés to Los Angeles of years past. I've made a little bit of a side career tracking down these people. They are sometimes quite remarkable poets, but as is the fate of most émigré literature, if they were published, they were self-published or published by houses so small with such poor distribution that the books rotted before they ended up in people's hands. But in some cases, a few poems survive here and there, a few books survive here and there, and I've reconstituted as best I could these earlier communities of Russian-speaking émigrés, many of them from Ukraine like myself, who fled cataclysms long ago. So the first poem I'll read is by Vladimir Korovin-Piotrovsky, who was probably the most serious of the poets who took up residence in Los Angeles at the very end of his life, who wrote in Russian. He was born in 1891. He, during the First World War, he was a part of the Imperial Army and remained on the side of the whites after the revolution, was taken prisoner by the Bolsheviks in his native Ukraine, and escaped miraculously. Fled eventually to Berlin, where he began a very successful literary career. But as you know, Berlin in the 1930s also became a hot spot. So he fled to Paris, as did many of the émigrés who settled in Berlin at that time. In Paris, he joined the resistance during the Second World War, was captured by the Nazis, imprisoned by the Gestapo, and was slated for execution. Luckily, the war ended, and he returned to freedom. Only in the last 5 years of his life did he have what we would consider happiness. He came to California and lived in Los Feliz and really flourished. His son, by the way, is a poet as well and a professor of mathematics in Houston. This poem is called Exile's Return. He imagines, and remember that although he was from a noble family with Polish roots, living in Ukraine and thinking of himself partly as Ukrainian, he also thought of himself as an imperial Russian, as a member of the Russian Empire. And so this poem is about returning to a Russia that is no more, which is the Russian Empire in which he had grown up. It's called Exile's Return. It's set in Long Beach. To perform a final honor, a sleek cruiser from Kronstadt sails into the silent harbor slowly, like a juggernaut. Ready for its distant journey, taking leave of foreign lands, comes a lightweight coffin swaying through a sea of lowered heads. Were we right or wrong? No matter. Flags at half-mast on the stern. With its scrap of Russian glory in the hold, the vessel turns. Such great heights, such depths below, joyful foam sprays everywhere, and a farewell siren bellows lonely in the azure air. All those stars and all those countries, the return he had long sought, a thick northern fog engorges the thin-throated Kattegat. As it nears the Gulf of Finland through the Baltic, drizzly dull, waves, serene yet unrelenting, beat against the cruiser's hull. In the brief glare from the lighthouse, they rise up and pass away, clouds and islands, blots of smoke, a barren key. We're back to depression now, I'm afraid. But I'll cheer you up with a cute little poem by Vladislav Ellis, who was also a man who had survived a number of catastrophes that would have felled lesser humans like myself. In the 1930s, growing up in Ukraine, in a family descended from English professionals, English engineers. With a name like Ellis, he was under suspicion simply for being a person of foreign background. His father and brother were swept up in the Stalinist purges in the late 1930s and killed. In the Second World War, he was drafted into the army and taken prisoner by the Bolsheviks, by slip of the tongue, taken prisoner by the Germans. And instead of settling for a life as a prisoner, he told them that he was an expert engineer and he was put to work building their railroads. That was something that would forever prevent him from returning to the Soviet Union. He would have been immediately executed for collaborating with the Germans. So he stayed in a displaced persons camp for a number of years before winning the right to settle in the United States. He chose California and again lived a very happy life. What struck him about the landscape of California is what strikes all of us. It's remarkable for me to just walk down the street and see palm trees next to pine trees, next to plants that really shouldn't have any place next to these trees. It's a paradise of flora, and that's all well and good, but if you think about where these trees really belong, some of these trees, and how good of a life they can have here. They can survive, but maybe survive is all they can do. You begin to wonder. So this is called a Mexican birch. We disfigure nature to disrupt life's flatness. I plant a little birch tree beside a prickly cactus and instantly regret it. How I mourn for her, an orphan in the desert, a spindly foreigner. She'll dwell here, never hearing spring's light-hearted song. Heat slayed her catkin earring, barely burst, now gone. Fearfully, her slender trunk bends with the wind. All migrants understand her. It's hard without a friend. Yeah, I agree. So I'll read just one more poem from the book, and then I'll read one of my newer poems, much worse than my older poems. Really a one-hit wonder, if you call this a hit. Okay, so really selling myself. Uncredited is the poem here, and it was inspired by a late-night viewing of Peter Gunn, which is something I do more regularly than I like to admit. Uncredited. No breakout leads. A prisoner of reruns on local stations high up on the dial. A stray recurring role, a guest appearance on Perry Mason, later Rockford Files. Her second act, pure Dullsville in Van Nuys. Chablis with ice, a Chevy dealership gone belly up, her paunchy husband's lies, a broken marriage, and a broken hip. None of that matters if you ever catch her singing How High the Moon, silvery, misty, on that one show. She isn't any match for the stainless Julie London or June Christie, but through her gauzy voice, as through a sieve, spare notes of heaven reach you from afar. For those 2 minutes, she'll make you believe somewhere there's music. It's where you are. Thank you. She's a Lola Albright is the woman's name. She's a wonderful singer and an even better actress. So the last poem I'll read is very fast and very funny. It should be very funny. If you don't laugh, you'll prove me wrong. It's called Days of the Races, and the epigraph is from Groucho Marx. Either he's dead or my watch has stopped. Groucho Marx. Groucho gets the laugh. Great. Okay. Away they go with their outlandish names, saddled with human baggage, desperate wagers, enough to make a thoroughbred go lame, be it a strapping colt or spry old stager. Away they go, with Monday in the lead, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday gaining speed. Friday and Saturday, poor things, are off the bridle, while Sunday, bless its heart, is simply idle. Some like to be there, tremble at the crack of every whip, eat dust, bathe in the lather, and feel the press of flesh. Me, I would rather keep my distance, make my bets off track. Each week I pony up a little dough, although I seldom win or place or even show. Thank you very much.
We've started to do Q&A, and so...
Oh, you must mic yourself.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, okay. We have started to do a Q&A, and I like it, and I think you will too. So I got a question for you. Do you, now that you're in Oklahoma so much of the time, alas, but
yes.
Hooray, are you planning on resurrecting the middle of the 20th century there for the native Oklahoma?
Well, I was just talking to Shannon about this earlier. Yeah. There are a surprising number of links between Oklahoma and California. I mean, those of you who know the history of the 1930s may not be surprised. If you've read Grapes of Wrath, you know that there are links. But they run much deeper. For instance, did you know that the man who wrote the play on which the musical Oklahoma, ! Is based, Lynn Riggs, was part Cherokee. He moved to Los Angeles in 1918 and took a job as a copy editor at the LA Times. And his first publication, while he was living at the YMCA building downtown, was a poem called Los Angeles in the Los Angeles Times. And it's this somewhat cubist portrait of life in Los Angeles. And from there he went back to, funny story. He was present in the LA Times building when it was bombed. And he didn't have enough money to get back to Oklahoma where he wanted to be, so he sold a story to a syndicate about being in the building when it was bombed, and the paycheck is what got him back to Oklahoma. Yeah. And the rest is, Rodgers and Hammerstein.
That was a story, right? Not a poem.
No, that was...
You don't sell poems, you sell stories.
Exactly. But I am writing a few things, but it's going to take some time before I feel anywhere near as comfortable with that terrain as I do with this one.
Yeah, well, that's one way to get comfortable, I guess, is to write about it. What about you people? What kind of questions do you have for Boris? Oh, come on, you're not that hard an audience. Yes.
I love how dorky your history, like her historical knowledge, seeps into your poetry. I find it really admirable. How much...
Are we taping this? This is being taped, yes?
Just okay. Like the sheer amount of control that you have in terms of rhyme, meter, and just form in general. And I was wondering, as a poet, like, where do you find yourself entering into these poems, i.e., I mean this question in the sense of how do they get produced? Do you start off with sound or form?
Oh, yeah.
And I also mean it in the sense of, like, when you read the poem like you do to us, and you gather all your galaxy brain knowledge and you deliver to us on this little episodic platter, Where do you put yourself in your mind into the poem? And
Oh,
where do you find
that's an
yourself in
excellent
it?
question. I see at least two questions in that. I would say that the entryway into the poem, if I knew where if I knew where the box opened every time, I'd open the box every time. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
And I think all poets know that. I think my entryway is usually a phrase or a line that emerges after long, sustained meditation on the back burner. Somewhere in the back of my mind is a story or an episode and a feeling about that story or episode. But I don't write a thing until a line is formed, and it may not be directly related to what I want to say, but it's good enough to commit to paper. And once I've committed it to paper, then I can begin shaping it. So my entryway is usually, and this is probably why I'm drawn to meter and rhyme. My entryway is usually technical. It's something that sounds permanent because it has shape, and it's worth putting down. And usually that's something metrical.
Yeah, that's a wonderful wonderful answer. Fewer poets these days use rhyme and meter, as you well know. Do you think we lose? What do you think that costs us? Is it? You think it's a matter of freeing ourselves from those shackles, or is it a matter of something else?
Well, I'm very excited to live in a time when so many people have freed themselves from the shackles that they don't even recognize the shackles when they see them. And so I can sneak my metrical poems in, and people frequently don't even recognize the meter. So it's very liberating, actually, because I can no longer be, I can no longer be painted a formalist and dismissed. No, it is. That's facetious. But the truth is, I do think that something has happened in the last maybe 10, 15 years where the poetry wars, in which I did not participate, being a little bit too young, the poetry wars are old news. They're over. And people don't go at each other's throats over questions of form the way that they once did. And so it's a free-for-all. And I don't have to be nervous about writing in form. But what do we lose when we lose the sense of where the net stood before it was taken down?
Okay.
Yeah, is that I think it's we have a toolkit, and if we abandon 75% of the tools, we can still do the job, but maybe we couldn't. We don't put the finishing touches on it, and maybe it takes us a little bit longer than it would otherwise, and maybe the final product isn't as immediately appealing, and that's fine. But I feel like a person who knows that there are 5 more tools that I can make use of.
Do you ever? I don't know. It strikes me that, as it has struck many before me, that one thing about rhyme, and about meter too, I guess, is that it's a heuristic device.
No question about it. And when you Eudora Welty said that when she first read Chekhov, it was as if the angels were singing to her. And when I first heard you say something like that in a workshop, these many years ago, it was as if the angels were singing to me. Because it seemed perfectly obvious to me that I would not have made the discoveries, whatever little discoveries I had made in my juvenile poems, I would never have made them were it not for the surprise of rhyme or the surprise of meter. The way that the restrictions forced me to choose words I would not have otherwise chosen that seemed far truer and far better to what I was trying to conjure.
So you wouldn't have, perhaps, if you hadn't had Pasadena there,
Yes.
you wouldn't have rhymed it with
Misdemeanors.
Yeah.
And then the court pun would have been lost. And all of you would have been that much poorer. Yeah.
Did it start with
Wait for the mic.
Oh.
Did that poem start with the court pun?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And it actually started with my walking around in Pasadena and remembering the word clinker tile, the term clinker tile. When I was looking at some of these tiles, I thought, what do they call those? Oh, clinker tiles. And then I thought, there's probably a poem in there somewhere. I have a feeling about that, I'm sure. And then I had the feeling, and I was overcome by the feeling, and then I had a pun, and then I had all the makings of a poem. A pun, a feeling, and one term. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, here. Do we have a mic?
So there's an LA poet who's now has his work in Tulsa, Bob Dylan.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Have you
That
been
guy.
over there? And have you been to the Woody Guthrie archives in Tulsa, whose mother-in-law was a famous Yiddish poet?
That's right, that's right. And if you haven't heard Woody's Hanukkah songs, keep it that way. No, they're wonderful. Yes, the very first place I visited in Tulsa was the Woody Guthrie Center, before the Dylan Center existed, some years ago. And I knew that this was a place where I could make a home. It's a very well-curated center, and one of the cleverest touches is, did you know that Woody wrote a poem or a song about Fred Trump? Yeah? Old man Trump made a tramp out of me. And this is a pretty good poem, very engagé, based on his experiences as a GI, on the GI Bill, and learning that Fred Trump was actually ripping off GIs in his housing developments. And so he wrote this poem, Trump Made a Tramp Out of Me, and the good people at the center put that poem front and center during the Trump years for a very uncanny time travel experience, because Fred isn't named. You just see old man Trump. So it's a very good place to visit if you haven't visited it. The Dylan Center I've also been to, but it's so vast that you really can't take it all in a year's time. It's enormous, and there's a constant rotation of his papers, various papers like letters from Jimmy Carter and things like this up on the second floor, and the first floor is all audio-visual. And the one thing I remember is a little photo of him backstage at Letterman shaking Liberace's hand. So I don't know if Bob wants us to see that.
Right here, I don't. Okay, well, wherever you are, that's good.
Hi, do you ever write poems in Ukrainian? Or have you ever translated your English poems into Ukrainian?
Oh, that's a wonderful
And
question.
if so, what's the biggest challenge?
My Ukrainian is just simply not good enough, nor is my Russian to write poems, nowhere near. I wish it were better, but when I think of, when I try to find a way to express something in English, I have 20 options springing to the tip of my tongue. I know exactly what tone to use. I know exactly what little nuance I want to pick out of this line to put it exactly the right way. When I think of my options in Ukrainian, I barely have one if. And when I think of my options in Russian, I have maybe 3. And that's simply because the language just doesn't live in me as actively as English does. I'm surrounded by various kinds of English, and most of the Russian and the Ukrainian that I take in is from the page. I hear it. I hear people talking to me on YouTube and things like this, but I don't have a living connection to either language. It's very stale, and I don't say that proudly. I just think it, the kind of poems I write, in order to make the kind of excellent jokes that I make, I have to have a lot of freedom.
We're talking about an award-winning translator of Babel and Tolstoy and
Into
a few
English,
others.
all into English, all into English. So I can pick it out. I can sense what's happening in the original quite well. But the knowledge is passive. It's not something I can produce. I can't produce those things. I can recognize them easily, but I can't produce them.
You know, I really can't see very well. If you.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's up. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I can't see anything either.
Hi there, in the back. You spoke a little bit about your work translating local artists, local poets who are Russian emigres or Slavic emigres.
Yes.
What does the process look like of actually locating these unpublished, self-published, or underpublished poets?
I love that question. Thank you very much. So, in some cases, it is the work has been digitized in large archives of emigre literature, and so you have to search for certain terms to find a connection to Los Angeles or a connection to California. There are encyclopedias in which each emigre of any standing up until 1991 has one or two lines, or sometimes a very full entry, at least listing where they were born or where they passed away. And often I'm reduced to just going page after page after page looking for the word Los Angeles. And then when I find the word Los Angeles, I try to find some work by these people, you know. Poet Los Angeles, great, okay, where can I find some of this stuff? In some cases, my friends, like Ivan, right here, will provide me with, with a stash of work collected by him and by my friend Sasha that has been donated or left to them because people know of their interest as curators of the Russophone immigration here in Los Angeles. And I will take one of these books, and the process usually is reading it cover to cover and finding that one poem that really shines, that I can do something with in English. Sometimes two poems, sometimes three. On rare occasions, an entire book. But that's what the process usually looks like.
Thank you so much, Boris. It's very funny. So I was thinking that we can recognize some of the Odessa humor here.
Oh,
so
thank you. Some
influence.
Yes.
So I would like to ask you if you would like to share perhaps some insights on how your experience as an émigré
Yes.
or from Odessa, or your parents' experience influence your themes and emotions.
Yes.
On writing your poems. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that question, Stella. It's really hard to give a good answer, but I've always liked what Edward Said wrote about the exilic condition and the double vision of the exilic condition, that you're always comparing what you see in front of you to something else, to what you know from before. And sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. He had a particular description of that, but for me, I think it extends, to even a joyous experience of exile. You may compare something that you see before you and not find it wanting. It is infinitely better than what came before. And then sometimes you may be having a great deal of fun, but a memory will swim up and not necessarily spoil the fun, but add nuance to it, so that you're aware that this isn't the only way it could be. It could be either much worse or it could be somewhat better. So the notion that you're always conscious that the thing you see in front of you is impermanent and conditional and changeable and could be taken away. I think that's the emigre condition.
Hi. So my question relates to your experience of Los Angeles, because you've mentioned how, for better or worse, the city's changed, and I want to know what you believe is what the city has kept immortal, like what's eternal, What will never change besides the
Johnny's coffee shop.
Johnny's coffee shop?
No, because it's useless. It's just sitting there. And if they haven't knocked it down now, they'll never knock it down. Let's see. What's permanent about Los Angeles? I think there's a completely cliched answer, but the change is the permanent thing. The flux is what's permanent. The sense that you get that the ground is shifting under your feet, and that what you love will not remain well. Yeah, and that seems permanent. Yeah. A lot of questions. That's good, isn't it?
Well, no, I mean, there are hands up.
Yes,
It's
this is
just that
great.
it takes us a while to get there. But maybe just a couple more questions. My last question, is there any question you cannot answer?
Any question? Well,
But anyway,
that one.
just two more questions, okay?
Okay. Well, Eric, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I'm trying to find a way to ask this is not like lengthy and pretentious. We used to get together at Schwartz's on Fairfax.
Yes.
It's gone now, right?
It's gone.
It's gone.
It's gone,
And
gone.
So I do walk up that part of Fairfax, and I associate it with you.
Oh, yeah. And
I also think about, Baudelaire, the Swan.
oh, yes.
Like all these writers who, just dining in on, like, the city's gone.
Yes.
Dickens, Little Dorrit,
Yes.
it's all based on the fact that the Marshalsea prison is gone. And I guess my question is, do you have a genealogy of writers, I don't know, Walter Benjamin, Baudelaire, whoever, who are your, pals?
Yeah.
That you kind of see yourself part of, that you could all get together at Schwartz's?
Well, I'm a big Flaneur fan, huge Flaneur fan, so any one of them will go. But I think my genealogy is probably, it'll scare the pants off you if I tell you who I'd like to see at Schwartz's. Whom I'd like to see at Schwartz's. It would be John Betjeman and Larkin and some of the movement poets. And it would probably be, if we're casting a wider net culturally, it would probably be Baudelaire, certainly, whom I read quite a lot. And I would say of the other European languages, Gottfried Benn would be a person, a nice Nazi I would invite over to Schwartz's. I would also probably invite Byron because he wouldn't stay long, but he does inspire me quite a lot formally. Oh, sure, yes, yeah.
One more question?
Hey, so it seems like heartbreak and broken dreams are themes in your poems. I'm wondering how personal that is.
Well, I wish my wife were here. I think I probably play it up a little over much. I'm not that heartbroken, but I am sufficiently heartbroken at moments. And I've always thought of poems as perfected portraits of an ego at one moment that seems to be a character with a lifespan. No matter how short the poem, no matter how lyrically condensed, when you read a little poem, you should be able to imagine the entire person behind it. Not necessarily the biographical details, but you should believe that this person has lived a life. And but it's not necessarily the life of the poet. It's the life the poet took on in order to create this persona, this little snippet of a persona that tells of more. So I think that anyone who has, I'm drawn to the subject of broken dreams and disappointment. What did Larkin say? That it was a great line. It wasn't desolation. It was something quite negative. Despair is to me what daffodils were to Wordsworth. But it wasn't despair. He wouldn't have said despair. He wouldn't have allowed himself that it was deprivation. Deprivation to me is what daffodils were to Wordsworth, and it's just a source of inspiration. It's the kind of character I can build better. I still haven't found a way to build a truly happy character, and when I do, then you'll think that all my poems are fit for Disneyland.
That's a great last question. Thank you all very much for coming out.